Welcome to Michael's Record Collection. I'm very excited to have with me from the band Galahad. I've got Stu Nicholson and Dean Baker with me. Gentlemen, thanks for your time today.
Hello.
Hello. Good evening, afternoon.
Yes, afternoon for me. I believe you're in the early evening now. And thank you for joining me to talk. We're going to talk a little bit about The Last Great Adventurer, an album that came out in October on Avalon Records. I've been enjoying it quite a bit, especially the last few weeks. But I want to start out by asking each of you, I'll take turns here, by asking you your first favorite record. Stu, we'll start with you. What was the first record that really kind of grabbed you when you were a kid?
That's really difficult. The first album I ever bought was Sheer Heart Attack by Queen
Okay.
in 1974, which immediately I just loved, and I've loved it ever since. I think I'm on my third copy now. And my niece is very into Queen at the moment, so I've given her my first copy. So she's very, very chuffed about that. But the first single I remember buying and really enjoying was actually Space Oddity. David Bowie. It was a maxi single, so you got three songs on it: Velvet Goldmine, Changes, and Space Oddity. And of course, Rick Wakeman played keyboards on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he played keyboards on the Hunky Dory, the album, which initially didn't chart. It didn't do very well, and then as Bowie got bigger, it recharted and since become a classic. So
yeah.
There's lots of others, but I could spend hours talking about it. I think Dean should have a go.
let's give Dean a try here. Dean, your first favorite record?
Um, it's a tricky one. I think I would probably say it's going to have to be Abbey Road by the Beatles, solely because I was about 2.5 years old, and I scratched my uncle's copy of it.
Oh, no.
And my uncle wasn't best pleased, so my mum had to go out, buy another copy, and then that was my first record I was given.
You get to keep the scratched one?
Yeah, exactly. So I played it to death for the next 10 years, I suppose. So I suppose that's probably going to be Abbey Road.
Yeah. Well, hey, those are both very, very good ones. I appreciate you sharing
definitely.
that.
Yeah.
So Stu, you are the lead vocalist for Galahad. Dean plays keyboards and does backing vocals and programming and that kind of thing. Are either of you from a musical family, or did you guys kind of pick up the ball and run? I'll start with you again, Stu. What was your family upbringing like in terms of music? Were your parents, did they play instruments or anything?
No, they weren't interested really. I didn't have any encouragement at all, to be perfectly honest. No disrespect to them, but they just weren't really into music. And my mum was a bit, but not my dad really, apart from some really old stuff. Some jazz kind of stuff, which ties in with The Last Great Adventure, actually, which you probably noticed at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But no, my granddad was a musical singer. My mum's dad, back in the 40s, 30s, 40s, whatever. And my nan played piano, and that's as close as it gets, really. To be perfectly honest, I just love music, and from an early age, I was always writing things down and writing words down and coming up with ideas for songs and poems and little things. Most of it was terrible, and I've still got a lot of it, and it's going to stay in a file locked away. But no, and then the reason I got into being in a band was we went on a school trip to London, and we were on the coach, and I was with a mate of mine called Dave Younger, who's a very good guitarist actually. And he said, "Oh," and he's very into Genesis. It's his favorite band, and I was singing a Genesis song, just humming it on the bus. And he said, "Oh, you haven't got a bad voice. Maybe you should try doing it a bit more seriously, or join a band or something." And I said, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea." So I did.
I have something in common with him then, because Genesis is my favorite band.
Oh, there you go then.
There you go. Dean, what about you? Are you from a musical family?
My nan, my grandmother, was a pianist. The whole family were. So just from a young boy, I was just playing her keyboard, her piano. She had an organ, whatever it would be, I'd just play it. And I played all of those real sort of, like, I don't know what you call them, but those, I look back and Viva España and Tie a Yellow Ribbon Round the Old Oak Tree, which are all these old classics, It's all those sort of, and she was a Londoner. So it'd be practically things like Roll Out the Barrel, etc. So yeah, that's basically Nan was. She was the only one of a family of 6 who wasn't trained. So she picked everything up by ear. All of her other sisters, her older sisters, were properly trained, but she. But they must have probably run out of money by the time they got to the youngest one. So she just learned from her sisters.
Yes. We can't keep putting these kids through training. It's just too expensive.
Yeah.
I understand. So this is, Galahad is a progressive rock band, and this is not a genre of music that has been particularly popular in recent years or decades. But what was it about progressive rock that caught your attention? What was was there a defining moment where you sort of got into prog rock? We'll start again with Stu.
Not really. I think it was just a gradual thing. Oh, by the way, my audition song for Galahad was Afterglow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So there you go. Yeah. And luckily I knew the words, and they seemed to like what I was doing. So that was it then. So, and here we are. But all these years later. But no, I mean, initially I was just into kind of pop music, I suppose, at the time. But I graduated towards more glam stuff. So I started buying singles by bands like Slade and Sweet and Mud and dare I say it, Gary Glitter. And then it went from there. And then I discovered Queen. And I just thought, and I remember watching Top of the Pops in 1974, I think it was, and they did Killer Queen. And I just thought, this band are so much better than any other band on this program. The rest of it's rubbish. And it was just the image. I love the image of they were slightly sort of glam with the nails and the long hair, and Freddie sort of prancing about and what have you, and Brian looking cool on the guitar. And I thought, yeah, I want to be Freddie Mercury. I thought, oh God, here we go. So, and I even got my mum to buy me a kimono for a birthday party, because they all got kimonos on their Japanese tour, I think, around that time. And then gradually I sort of found other bands, such as I found Genesis, Yes, Pink Floyd, Jethro Tull, even Barclay James Harris. But when I was younger, I didn't really know what prog was. I just liked these bands, and as only time went by, when people started mentioning this name, oh, you like prog then, or you like progressive rock, because I think in the very early 70s it wasn't really used that much. It was almost, as time went on, they were gradually more and more pigeonholed into a kind of music which was to sort of encapsulate all these bands that actually were very different. Rush don't sound anything like Yes, who don't sound anything like Jethro Tull. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And I just got into that. I mean, other things as well. I love Kate Bush, but then again, there's a bit of a prog thing going on there as well. I liked a lot of melody, but I liked songs that changed and weren't just straightforward verse chorus and had something a bit different in them. And I liked all the symphonic sounds and the mellotron. I fell in love with the mellotron sound when I was quite young as well. And it was a few years before I realised it was actually not a real choir, but and it's just a box with tapes in it. Yeah. But so it's a gradual thing. But Anyway, Dean should tell his story, because he's got a slightly different take on the whole thing.
All right, Dean, you're up.
Yeah, I didn't have a clue what all this prog was about. I didn't know at all. Locally, there was a recording studio, and they said to me, "Oh, there's a band looking for a keyboard player." And I think you'd had a few unsuccessful attempts at trying to find someone, and I thought, well, I'll go along and have a chat with them. So I went over, I met Stuart and Roy, and then they explained to me about progressive rock, and it was just a blank expression from me. I had no idea. And then they mentioned some bands, like Yes. And I'm like, oh yeah, Owner of a Lonely Heart. They're like, no. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, so I quite like that. Roy didn't.
So then it would be like Genesis, and I'd be thinking of, oh yeah, it's Phil Collins, isn't it? I know, yeah, In the Air Tonight, or A Groovy Kind of Love. So I was a little bit off, but really exciting for a keyboard player in particular. Massively exciting, because it was just like, plug all your keyboards in and just play whatever you want. So I did.
Mm.
Well, progressive rock is definitely a friend of keyboard players everywhere. There's no lack
Oh
of
yes.
that. But you're right. You're right. It doesn't encompass one style. It just basically is a neat little box to put in any music that has some adventure to it, that has some complexity.
Yeah.
And so it's I get that all the time with people ask me what kind of music I like, and I tell them that I like progressive rock, and they say, well, what is that? And then I have to go down a whole other conversation. So this is just a necessary evil of liking the music that we like, I think.
Mm. Mm. Well, I guess
Yeah.
it's a good way of explaining to people what it is, but I don't know about Dean. I just these days I just see us as a kind of modern rock band in a way that has a lot of different influences, including the prog influence. But what I loved about the fact that Dean joined was the fact it was someone who wasn't just going to ape Tony Banks or Rick Wakeman or someone like that, and actually just made it that made our sound slightly different. And I love that. And to this day, I think we've got that. I think over the years we've kind of gained our kind of sound, and a lot of that is to do with the sort of sounds and the ideas that Dean has. But still incorporating those sort of nods towards prog and the original bands that influenced us. I'm not someone like Stephen Wilson or someone like that who'll just say, oh no prog, no, we're not prog, blah blah blah, which he used to do on a regular basis in the old days when it wasn't trendy, but we've always said, well, we are what we are, we don't deny our influences. But I think in the band now it's a much wider influence, because the overall band influence isn't prog, because like Dean's main influences are not prog at all, more 80s kind of synth pop, I suppose, really. A lot of it, and the Beatles, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about an album, and one of the people on the podcast said something about a song being too long, and it was a 5-minute song. Like, how can a 5-minute song? I mean, a 5-minute song can be too long if there's no ideas in it, but that the idea of just because it's 5 minutes long, it's too long. Kind of, I got a good chuckle out of that, I guess.
We have 5-minute intros.
Yes. Yeah. I'm used to 5 minutes before there's any lyrics.
Yeah.
Yeah. True. I mean, when we recorded our first ever proper demo at a studio in Bournemouth called Studio 95, the lady who ran it, who was very nice, called Claudette, who Dean also knows, we started recording Ghost of Dirt Owl, and I think she was wondering when it was going to finish, because she'd never heard a song that was more than 4 or 5 minutes long. And she said, oh, I've never recorded a song that's 10 minutes long before. I said, oh, well, you have now.
We're going to run out of tape.
Yeah, right, yeah. Well, that is about half a 2-inch tape, about 10 minutes, because they're about 20 minutes on a 2-inch tape. So,
wow. So, The Last Great Adventure, I believe it's your 11th studio album.
It is, yeah.
And it's the first since 2018's Seas of Change. And I wondered, when did writing for this album begin, or is this something that you just keep ideas sort of floating around for a long time, and then they just sort of coalesce when you actually sit down to start writing? Can you sort of walk me through that process?
Well, we've always got a bank of ideas, and some of those songs we'd had for several years. I can't remember exactly. Some of them quite old, aren't they, Dean? I mean, obviously
the first 2 tracks, Alive, was, I think we came up with that original idea back in about 2012.
Wow! So
we were already working on Seas of Change.
Yeah, so not long after Another Life Not Lived, which was obviously written with Neil originally.
Yeah.
And that was around 2009-10, and then of course Neil unfortunately passed away a year later. But we felt it was just a nice thing to do, to actually get that song finished, because originally the idea was to use it with the Battle Scars album or Euphoria, but it didn't really fit, so we kind of held it over. And as Dean says, a lot of those songs are actually quite old. I guess the Enclosure was relatively new, wasn't it? I think that one was a newer instrumental, I think, initially. So, yeah. But yeah.
All right. The personnel on this album: Stu Nicholson, lead and backing vocals; Dean Baker, keyboards, orchestration, programming, and backing vocals; Spencer Luckman on drums, percussion, and First Triangle, which I love. Lee Abraham, electric, acoustic guitars and backing vocals, and Mark Spencer, bass guitars, Second Triangle, and backing vocals. First question I have here is First and Second Triangle.
It's kind of an in-joke, really.
Okay.
Can't really say any more than that.
Well, you get first and second violin section, so why not have a triangle section while you're at it?
Sure. Why not? Now, I remember Lee joined Galahad originally and was playing bass back in the, I guess, the Empire's Never Last era. He is now, I mean, he's a very good guitar player, a very good musician on multiple instruments, and a very good songwriter. When did he transition to guitar?
Oh, don't know.
No, it'd be in between.
I think he's
between his two stints with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's always played guitar, but obviously he played bass with us originally. But he kind of, I think between, as Dean says, between leaving us the first time and joining us the second time, he was playing more and more guitar. And he's been playing with a covers band locally that he plays at the weekends with. And he kind of started playing guitar more for that. And of course, he was writing a lot of his own albums, so he was honing his guitar skills whilst doing that as well. So he's a pretty versatile chap.
Yeah, for sure. Carl Groom did the editing, mixing, mastering, and co-producing with Galahad. This was, according to your liner note, it says recorded and engineered in Surrey, Dorset, Hampshire, and Herefordshire by Carl Groom, Dean Baker, Stu Nicholson, Lee Abraham, and Mark Spencer. That's is that just code for a lot of people recorded in their own studios?
Yeah. One word, COVID. So what happened was, the timeline was, we actually went into the studio around the end of 2019, managed to get all the drums recorded at Thin Ice, thank goodness, because it would be very difficult to record those in our houses, really. We did a couple of sessions there. I think we did the second session early in 2020, and then bang, COVID hit, and that was it. So we sent... Did we record things before we sent them to Carl? I can't remember, Dean. Did we record? Yeah, we did. Recorded parts at home, didn't we? Yeah. Guitars, bass, keyboards, and basically sent everything to Carl. And I got myself a decent Pro Tools set up at home, and I managed to record lots of different vocals, which was quite scary because I'd never really done it before. And I just did a lot of takes. Some weren't very good. Some were, because it was quite odd recording on your own, because normally it's good to have an engineer or someone else there, or Dean or the rest of the band, to say, yeah, that sounds good, that doesn't work, or I prefer that. But I didn't have any of that. So I just recorded everything I could, sent it to Carl, and he amazingly just put it all together, didn't he? You know, came up with a great sounding album somehow.
Let Carl figure it out.
Yeah, I think the great thing for Stuart was the fact that you could obviously, Stu, you could go off into your room and just record the vocals with no one watching, listening, experiment, do whatever you wanted. I think that's brilliant. It was eye-opening for us, because I think normally there is pressure when you're in the studio. It's one of those things where you're playing away on your keyboard, and then they go, right, we'll record that one, and you go and make a mistake straight away as soon as they say you record it. So I think with vocals, it's got to be 10 times worse. It's got to be an absolute nightmare for that. And then you maybe are singing 95%. You're not quite, you're a little bit reserved, just because you don't want to embarrass yourself, fluff your lines, you're concentrating. But when you're in your own studio, you can just go off and do whatever you want, because nobody else is going to hear it. If you decide that, you know what, that was the worst thing I've ever done in my life, erase. That's it. No one's heard it ever. So I think it was brilliant for Stuart. I think so. I think it was fantastic.
Yeah. No, and I think you're right, Dean. And I think that's the sort of dichotomy, really. It was quite scary doing it, because I've never done it before. I've certainly never done it before. But it does give you, it's more relaxed, because you can do what you like. And as you say, as Dean says, you can experiment and try different things. Yeah. Some things work, some things don't, but that doesn't matter. You know, you can then, you know, it can go through quality control later, and you can sift through it and decide. And that way, I think also you come up with far more ideas. And me and Dean, obviously, we did our Galahad Electric Company project as well, which was great. and that in a way was helping to get to know how to use it and what to do. And we did a lot of experimenting on those albums, and musically and vocally, I would say, and which is one reason why we kind of did it ourselves. Not all of it we felt would work with Galahad. Plus, it was nice to work together and work very quickly and get something out there. So, because we wanted to do something.
Yeah, I wonder in this era of recording in home studios, how many absolutely phenomenal takes end up just getting deleted because there's not a producer there to say, no, that's the one.
It's possible.
Yeah. That's I mean, and you guys have done it, you've done it both ways, so you know what it's like to be in the studio and having that immediate feedback and thinking something's good and being told it's not, or thinking something's not good and being told it is.
Yeah, well,
that's the trouble. You do need that balance. You need that. I wonder sometimes when you get acts. I remember years ago reading about George Michael and the fact that he was writing, recording, producing all of his own music. And you think, he was lucky it turned out well, because there was nobody there to tell him that it was maybe, oh, don't do that, that's a bit rubbish. There was no one there to tell him, because he was totally in control of the whole lot. And you think, wow, that's quite a task.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's a conundrum, because sometimes the wrong producer for the wrong band can also hurt more than help. So
well, we know about that as well.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that. It also says Carl recorded some of the drums at Thin Ice Studios in Surrey, and that leads me to my favorite part of your liner notes, which is the thank you to Clive Nolan, who has been on this show previously. He's credited on the album for Glühwein and Bratwurst and many memorable times over the years at Thin Ice. There's got to be a story behind Clive Nolan and Glühwein and Bratwurst.
Yeah.
Is it one that you can tell?
Yeah, it's fairly straightforward. Basically, it was last Christmas, wasn't it? I think Clive just invited us up, and we just finished getting pretty much everything ready for the album, and we've recorded at Clive's since 2005-6, I think, quite a long time at that location. And unfortunately, the studio's closed, and he's moved off into the wilds of near Hereford somewhere, where we haven't been yet. And I just wanted to thank him for all those times. And yeah, he did get some bratwurst and some rolls and some Glühwein and some alcohol, and it was very cold, and we were outside in a kind of German style bar tent thing. And yeah, we all went up as a band, and we had a good time. Carl came along as well, and it was good fun. Very cold, but good fun.
There are many good nights with Clive over the years as well. Every time we went up to the studio, we'd stay over for a few nights, and Clive would always join us for a few beers and a meal, and great times.
Yeah.
Right. Good to know. That really stuck out as an unusual line in the booklet.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it was our thank you. Obviously, there's a little bit of humor in there. It's just our thank you for all the good times over the years. And I think starting to record at Thin Ice was a watershed for us, because at last we'd found a producer stroke engineer in Carl, who kind of understood the band, understood where we were coming from, understood the sort of sound we wanted. And because up until that point, we hadn't really worked with anyone who had an awful lot of empathy with what we were up to. And Carl just knew, because he's in a band, he is a guitarist, he's a very good musician generally. And he as I said many times before, it's a cliche, he's a bit like our sort of George Martin, almost like a sixth member of the band at times. And he's very down to earth with it, very straightforward, no egos or anything, just a really nice guy. But honest as well. He'll soon tell you if you don't like something, it's not very good, in a nice way, obviously.
Yeah,
that's important. It's important to be diplomatic about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's quite disturbing, someone sort of looking at you, criticizing you while smiling.
Maybe we can try that one again.
Yeah, maybe that was a bit rubbish.
All right, so I want to talk about your writing process, and there might not be just one process, but how does a Galahad song start? How does it, what is the first step of a Galahad song becoming a Galahad song?
You can start.
Lots of, like you said, lots of different ways. Sometimes we've actually recorded a couple of songs in the past which are literally Stuart singing, and I've just gone, figure out what it is. Oh, there we go. Okay, that's an F minor. We're working around that basis. Other songs, Stuart has been. You've actually been unfortunately given a whole completely finished production, and just add words, please. It could be a challenge. Yeah. And then many levels in between that. I think since we've had our studio setups, it's been very it's been very efficient, hasn't it? I think, Stuart, I think it's probably the best way of saying that. Has been really efficient. But back in the old days, it was a case of recording, and then we'd rehearsing and then recording them onto a cassette or an MP3 player, mini disc, whatever it was we had, and then somehow try and recreate that when we got to thin ice. But nowadays we tend to go with audio files already in place for Carl. So it's much easier in that respect.
Stuart, do you have a preference? Do you have a preference on whether to start a song with an idea in the lyrics, or to try to think up a lyric once you know what the music is?
That's a very interesting question, quite a difficult question actually, because so many of the songs that we've written, and a lot of good songs, have actually been written in different ways. If I can, I've got a whole bank of lyrics and words and files. I would listen to Dean's song and the arrangement and what have you, and see if I can find something. And if I can't, then I'll write from scratch. Sometimes it's easier than others, and a lot of it depends also on the atmosphere of the music. Sometimes Dean will write something and I think straight away, yeah, I've got something for that, because it just fits the atmosphere. I can't explain how that happens, but it just does. And yet other times I would just sing something, come up with some lyrics, and then Dean will take those and mold them into a piece of music. I mean, Belly Full of Stones, did we do it with that one? I think it sounds amazing how we managed to sort that out.
Belly Full of Stones was I'm trying to remember now which one was which. We did have Belly Full of Stones was
Soul Therapy, isn't it?
Yeah. One of the tracks was certainly directly from your vocal, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Directly from the vocal. Actually, I think that was Open Water.
Ah, yes, it was Open Water.
Open Water was directly from one of Stuart's vocals, and it took a very interesting turn, because it's fantastic. And if anybody tries to work out how to play that song, they'll either think we're crazy or clever. I don't know which way round it'll be. but we've got a basic sort of chord progression. Everything went fine. Then you left a gap, and then you started singing again. But by now, the key had changed fractionally.
I inadvertently changed key, not realising.
Yeah. And so I started working out the chords, and it would fit in the normal way. It was still, I can't remember the chord structure, but say, F minor, C minor, everything. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, what's going on there? And then and it was totally different. And we've got two choruses in two different styles of the same chorus, if that makes sense. So very interesting. But that was because you had no it was just literally press record and sing.
Well, there's no musical reference point, so it's very easy to veer off. But it's good in a way, because it means it ended up being something quite different. But in terms of the sort of more bombastic material, the sort of longer stuff, really the music comes first, I would say. Although, having said that, I've just contradicted myself, because with Seas of Change, it started off as a very short, about 8 or 9 minute piece of music, and I'm writing more words, more lyrics, telling Dean, discussing it, thinking, well, that will work well here, or that will work, put a bit of mellotron there, put whatever. And then Dean ended up expanding the music, and so he ended up with a 42-minute song, basically, which took up the whole album.
I've got to say it was brilliant, because it was really exciting doing Seas of Change, but it was also really funny, because I'd be working on the music, and Stuart would be in touch with me saying, "Oh, that'd be really good if you put. Oh, I can imagine a bit of harpsichord there. Oh yeah, brilliant. I'll add that in, and I'll do all that." And then the following day, "Oh, there's a great line for a flute, I can imagine. So okay, do that one. Send it." I mean, we must have done about 50 versions of that because Stuart kept on saying, "Oh, it'd be really good."
Find out.
And I'm going, "Oh my goodness, this is getting a little bit long now." And then we got to a stage of no return where the song by now had sort of taken on about 25 minutes, maybe 27, coming on to 30. And then it was the case of, I think we ought to make this as the album. So now we've got to make it longer again. So it went on and on. It was a fantastic process, though. It was such a good process because that was totally just Stu and myself, like, you know, in a tennis court, just batting the ideas back to each other. It was fantastic. Really good.
That's great.
No,
We've made it too long. Now we have to make it longer.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, honestly, it was fantastic because I actually listened to it the other day for the first time in quite a long time. Because once we've got an album out, I don't tend to listen to them too much, too close, because you're kind of not sick of it, but you've heard it so often, you just want to step away. And I heard it the other day, and honestly, I couldn't. It's almost like I thought, did we really write that? Is that really? Do you know what I mean? It's like I couldn't believe what we'd written because I think it sounds. I don't mean to blow my trumpet or anything, but I just thought it sounded really good, and I was just amazed that me and you came up with that. I thought, wow.
Yeah. Also did an awful lot of work on the music without any restrictions with metronome. So there was no metronome or click track going in the background, and it was a case of let me play. We get to a certain point, we've written up to this point, I'm just going to listen to it, and I'm going to, whatever comes into my head, I'm going to hum it. I'm going to work out what it is. Don't care what time signature, what tempo, and it'll just flow in from the end of that. And we did that all the way through, didn't we? And it was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic experience.
Lots of twists and turns and what have you. And I'm really quite proud of that, actually. Yeah.
Now, when you work like that, how difficult is that for the drummer to come in and figure out his part?
And the guitarist. I think Lee was actually more. Lee was really did struggle with a lot of that to start. He did struggle. That sounds the wrong way of putting it, but it wasn't guitarist friendly. The keys that I was using, some of the timing. I mean, Spencer had this whole problem with the drums, but Lee just had as many problems with the guitar as well. So it was very much. Unfortunately, we just went off on a wing and a prayer and just carried on adding all these bits. And it was like, well, yeah, they'll work around it. They'll find a way. And they were.
And they did.
They were okay with it. They weren't always happy, were they? But there were times when we go.
But I think you got to remember the context was that we lost Roy, and we didn't actually have a guitarist in the band when we started writing that material, and we were looking for a guitarist, and we had a few options, and then I think it was Carl said, "Well, why don't you try Lee?" And I thought, that's not a bad idea because we hadn't spoken to Lee for a while. And Carl had been working on some of his albums and said that his playing was really good. And I thought, well, actually, yeah, because I remember getting a copy of The Season's Turn, I think, which I think is personally my favourite of Lee's albums. I thought the guitar playing on there was excellent. And I asked Lee initially if he'd be happy to maybe be a part of it, not be the guitarist, but just maybe do a few guest spots here and there. Because I was hoping that Carl might play some of the main guitar bits as well. But then Carl said he did some acoustic stuff, but he said he was actually a bit busy with Threshold and other things, so he couldn't. And then I said to Lee, well, do you fancy doing the lot? And amazingly, he said, no, I'd love to. In fact, I was hoping you'd say that. Oh, right. I didn't realise. Okay, you can be the guitarist.
It seems like a very English thing where it's just, I didn't want to ask, but I was hoping you would ask me to do
it. Yeah.
Well,
go around every corner apart from the one we wanted to be on.
All right. So for The Last Great Adventurer, did you come into this album with any kind of not a concept, but a theme in mind that you wanted to sort of structure it around?
To be honest, from my own personal point of view, I was actually wanted to do the next album that actually wasn't a concept album, the opposite of Seas of Change, and to have several distinctive separate tracks and different styles and what have you, which I think is what we've ended up with. And someone actually said to me in one of these year-end polls the other day, oh, they were very enthusiastic, and they, I just wanted to let you know we've put Last Great Adventure in for best concept album, and I had to get back to, I'm sorry, but it's not actually a concept album. Oh, isn't it? Oh, there seem to be recurring themes, and I said, well, which is great because people can obviously interpret songs how they want to interpret them. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, I suppose in a way you could say it was linked, because most of the songs are quite personal, and it's all about the human condition and the way people do things or react, and the emotions that are showed, and you know, and the foibles of the sort of human condition and all that. And I hadn't really thought about that before, but that was purely by chance. That wasn't anything that was meant. And the whole point of the only concept I was consciously aware of was the actual track, The Last Great Adventurer, and tying in all the artwork with that idea and that concept, which Paul Tippett, who we have to, you know, tip our hats to, really did a fantastic job on the graphics. And as you probably know, the guy on the front is actually my dad climbing up Großglockner in Austria, which is the highest mountain in Austria, in the late 50s. It was very little kit, actually. It must have been quite cold, I would have thought. But yeah, that was the only real concept, as far as, you know, the album goes.
Yeah, I didn't get concept album from it, but I did get a consistency from it. I do think that the artwork does tie everything together very in a way that's very consistent and very very of a piece, you know.
No, definitely. Yeah.
So the album starts off with Alive, which is probably one of the more catchy Galahad songs, you know, in the catalog. Where did the origin of this story, specifically the chorus, come from? It lyrically sort of, with the picture that is in the booklet as well, it kind of comes off as a sort of a song to your fans.
It is. It's a shout out to the fans, because I thought, we've been going 37 years, and I've never really written anything to say, well, thanks, guys. Thanks to everyone who supported us. Because if it wasn't for you guys, you know, we could have run out of steam or lost interest or whatever. And obviously having a fan base is a big thing. I mean, we don't write for other people. We write for ourselves. But we hope that we can bring people along with us. And luckily, we've managed to do that over the years. And as you know, we don't tend to compromise too much on what the sort of music we'll put out on an album or the songs or whatever. And it was really, a shout out and a thank you to everyone who supported us. And it's sort of about that, and it's all about maybe, you know, being on tour and getting a great audience and getting a great feeling at the end of it. And it just makes you want to, you know, keep going and keep at it, as it were.
Yeah. Is this one of those that started with the words or started with the music?
I can't remember.
That was the one where the music, I specifically remember both Amiga Lights and Alive writing the music and getting really excited, but back in about 2012, 2013. And then they just got added to all of the other demo songs. Myself and Stu got, I don't know, we've got 30 odd sort of songs, haven't we, or so, which we've worked on, and then we probably got more than double that again with little ideas, which we've all got on a server, and we share the folder, and we periodically trawl through the folder and see what's there. But I specifically remember writing the music for that, which is quite interesting. And then all of a sudden, Stu just came back one day and said, "Oh, finished," and it was a whole song. It was basically, that's what it was, wasn't it? It was there.
Definitely, but like Dean said earlier on, it was another case of I thinking about it now. I heard Alive, and I love the melody on the chorus. I thought, yeah, this could be a really great chorus. It's simple, but it's quite effective. And it took a while to get the lyrics to fit, but we kind of got there in the end on the verses and what have you. But we did get there. And the same with Amiga Lights. I just love the melodies in that song, and it did remind me, actually, Amiga Lights actually is the name of a sound, isn't it, that you were using? And normally we change those. That's just a working title, and normally I would change that because Dean will just call it something, maybe a sound that he's using.
A patch from a synthesizer. Yeah, that's all it was.
And normally I would write the lyrics for the title, and then that would just be a working title, and then we would, replace the proper with the proper title. But I thought Omega Lights actually is a great title, and it reminds me of a place called Sandbanks near where we live, which is a long stretch of beach just outside Poole Harbour. And I love it. In the summer, I go there a lot, mainly in the evenings. I prefer it in the evenings when there's less people about, basically, when it's warm. And it's just such a beautiful place. And the idea of the Omega Lights is basically just all the lights around the harbour at night, because Omega is the end, as it were, Alpha to Omega or whatever. And I thought that it just tied in really quite nicely.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of, I had to say, it's kind of love song to a place, I guess.
That's great, because you guys have answered the questions I had about that song, that second track, Omega Lights. Because,
there you go.
because it did very much lyrically feel like it took place in a specific spot, and it was written very much. It sounds like it was very, or I guess sounds the wrong word. When you're reading the lyrics, it seems to come off as something that was written in the moment where you're taking everything in.
Actually, no, you're right. Definitely. Looking out across the harbour, across the vista. And in fact, in the booklet, that actually is Sandbanks. If you open the booklet, that is it. That is, it's the sort of beach side, basically. And you can see the houses and the lights and what have you. But it's just a lovely spot. I mean, we live at, I love where we live, and it's just a nice place to go, basically.
Yeah. And the second question I would have had there was, what are Omega Lights? Because that is such an interesting, it's an interesting phrase. So I Googled it, and it kind of come up with things like skin therapy, and there was something from Fortnite and the video game, but I didn't know what an Omega Light was. So it was a patch, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. That's the bizarre thing. It's just a patch, a sound for keyboards, but again, I think writing is all about the imagination, isn't it? It's about interpreting things, and it just seemed to click, and immediately I just thought of that straight away. I don't know how or why, but it just sort of happened.
That's one of the great things about music, is that words don't have to necessarily have a literal meaning, as long as they fit well together and fire the imagination.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that brings us to the third track, Blood, Skin, and Bone. And I wondered if there was a single incident that inspired this song.
Not really, I don't think. Again, I think that was probably one of the banks of lyrics that I, part of my file.
Mm-hmm.
And I just listened to the music, and I thought, yeah, this could work. And I got the melody, the blood, skin, and bone, because I already had that sort of in my head, and it happened to work very well with what Dean had written musically. So it was kind of written around that. And then I just had this idea of, the fact that, there's so much prejudice in this world based upon what people look like, or how big they are, or what color they are. And when underneath it, actually, we're all made of the same stuff,
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what separates us is more psychological than physical.
Yeah. The thing that strikes me about this song is that it does sort of touch that nerve, where it's unbelievable that as a species we can't keep in mind the fact that we have way more similarities than we have differences, and
Exactly.
and we tend to focus on what's different, and it's like walking into a very beautiful, clean house, and there's a spot in the corner, and you can't keep your eye off the spot in the corner and see the magnificent house and room around you.
Yeah.
Dean, what was the sort of the start of that musical piece for Blood, Skin, and Bone?
I actually there was another artist called Coburg who originally came up with the riff and the genesis of that track, and then it didn't really fit with her own music, and she said this might be something which could work with Galahad. So I took it away, and we've still got all that riff, all that intro, and I developed a chorus to work with it. Added a few other little sounds, but yeah, basically that was the first time I think that we've ever actually worked with someone outside of Galahad to come up with something. So that was an interesting an interesting way of doing it. The great thing was the fact that she just said, Coburg just said, just do what you want with it. So there was no toing and throwing about, you know, oh, we're doing this right, we're doing that wrong, because us musicians do get a bit precious sometimes. It is a bit difficult when you're trying to do your own song, and it's like, well, you know. But luckily, she just released it, let it go, and just said, do what you want with it and use it yourself. So I love the riff, absolutely adored the riff. And there's that vocal line going over the top, which is actually a Hebrew line.
Okay.
And yeah, it had all the elements in it to make a start on the rest of the track.
The fourth track, Enclosure 1764, the first time I listened through the album, that was sort of the one that stuck out to me as being interesting. This 18th century anti-enclosure rhyme gets turned into a song. What sort of spoke to you about that? Because that's an unusual place to start.
It certainly is. Basically, pardon me. Dean sort of sent this one was the music first. Basically, Dean sent me this very widescreen kind of filmic type music, and I thought, this is kind of epic. It kind of needs something a little bit different, something not just a straight ahead, you know, verse chorus normal song type thing. And I thought, well, maybe a poem or something might work with it. And I've got a lot of poetry by various people in my bookcase, and I looked at some Thomas Hardy, also William Barnes, who's a local Dorset poet, who one of his poems was used on When the Battle Is Over, and I sing it or partly talk it in a Dorset accent, actually, which is quite interesting. But I couldn't find anything. And then inadvertently, I found this Enclosure poem online. I can't remember quite how, and I thought, actually, and I read the words and thought, this actually, although it's, you know, 300 or 400 years old, it's still relevant. It still rings true after all these years. You know, this whole thing about those who have all the power and how everything, you know, and wield it, and we're still in a similar situation, you know, and these days it's not about land. Maybe it's powerful landlords who charge massive rents, so people can't afford to live in their homes and their you know, houses or whatever, and it is a kind of them and us, and it's sort of, you know, it is sort of about oppression in a way, I suppose. And I just thought, you know, it still kind of resonates. And when we came to recording vocals for that track, I kind of did a selection of different ideas and different ways of vocalizing it. I did a couple where I kind of almost talked all the way through it, a couple where I sang, and a couple where I kind of did a bit of each. And I think we ended up with a bit of a hybrid, basically. And I was probably more nervous about that song than anything else on the album, because I wasn't sure whether it would work or not.
Well, I have to thank you for bringing that to my attention. I wasn't aware of that old poem, and I just love the turnabout of it, of you know, the crime of taking a goose from the common, but who's going to pay for the crime of taking the common from the goose?
Exactly. Yeah. That, you know, that land was common land, and then it was taken by rich people and told the poor people, sorry, you can't use that. And and then they would get hung for using it. You know, it's very allegorical as well, obviously. But I love that. I love the fact that it still rings true. You know, it still resonates.
A cool little military march style drumming in the song from Spencer. Was that his idea, or did somebody suggest that? Do you remember?
I think it might have been Spencer's idea, actually.
I think it was. Yeah.
I think it was Spencer's idea. It sort of added to. I was listening a lot to. It's interesting, actually, because I was listening to M83, and they do that song outro, or he does that song outro. It's the theme tune to the TV series Versailles, and it struck me when I heard it the first time. I thought, oh my goodness, that's what Neil, our old bass player. I remember him saying to me once, we were trying to find a sound. We were trying to find like a pad sound on the synthesizer, and he said, find me a pad sound that makes me weep. And I've never forgotten that. And sure enough, I was listening to that and I was thinking, M83 I found something that makes you weep. So I wanted to try and I just started writing this piece quite inspired from that one particular track. And then then it was a lot later Stuart came up with these lyrics. But really interesting what Stuart was saying about the lyrics was the fact that they were written such a long time ago, and yet they seem to be actually relevant today. But also that's the same with Blood, Skin and Bone. So Blood, Skin and Bone lyrics were written a long time ago, but then we had the whole incident with George Floyd.
Yeah,
all that, and you sort of think it just makes you realize that we don't learn from our mistakes, do we? As a human race, we don't learn. It's still the next thing happens again. So Stuart's writing a lyric based around the prejudices, etc., and then probably one of the biggest events for a decade happens in terms of prejudice, and you think, wow, it's like, and of course exactly the same with Goose from the Common. So we don't learn.
Yeah, I thought I'd ask about that military drumming, because it just sort of lends that sort of that old timey feel to the song, and works so well with the old lyrics, because people don't generally refer to anything as a common anymore. We have different words, but it works really well. I like the way that one came out.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the way Carl mixed it as well, it just oozes that atmosphere.
I gave me when I heard it.
Yeah, exactly. When Carl first sent the first mixes, I literally had goosebumps. I thought, wow, I just wasn't expecting it to hit me so much, and which is that doesn't always happen when you get mixes back, I can tell you, but it did in that instance.
It's very strong. The epic, The Last Great Adventure, you mentioned in the liner notes, Bob Nicholson, your dad, the inspiration for the song and the picture on the cover. Tell me about Bob. Tell me about Bob Nicholson and what inspired you to write this song about him.
I think I've always wanted to do something to just, again, tip my hat off to Dad, because he's done a lot. He's done a lot in his life, and he's getting quite old now. He's 87. He's struggling a little bit with various things, and I kind of wanted to do something while he's still with us, basically. And I just had a lot of ideas lyrically, and sort of put them all together. And again, these have been written over years. I mean, these are scraps of bits and bobs that are written over the years, and then it all came together on the chorus, which again was quite inspiring to bringing it all together. But this song, actually, we kind of wrote it as a band, or we finished it as a band. I mean, obviously, me and Dean had the sketches, but there are additional sections that we put in rehearsal before we went into the studio, and then we came up with this sort of jazzy ending, which was so appropriate, because my dad was he didn't really like that much music, but he loved his jazz, especially his traditional jazz. And he was a big fan of a guy called Gene Krupa, who was a jazz drummer back in the sort of 40s and 50s. So we thought we'd sort of add this sort of jazzy ending on the end of the track. Plus, there's a kind of jazzy section in the middle, which gradually builds and builds and builds and gets quite heavy, which again is something a bit different. We always like to, sort of throw different things in there.
We also, it started to, I think we all started to get quite excited when once Stuart had come up with the lyric content of the song, we started to be able to focus on what it was about. And with a lot of changes, like you say, the jazz part, but also there's a section in the middle where we're using all of the we got sounds of drills and saws and power tools, and because Stuart's dad used to be an engineer.
He was a basic design engineer.
So it's brilliant. So it was really quite inspiring with all that.
It's a very cinematic song, and you can imagine this song put to film, where all of the montage of everything that's going on sort of dissolves at the end into this dark, smoky jazz lounge. It's a very visual song.
Oh, without a doubt, that was the idea. And I think, like you say, you get things in your head, and as Dean pointed out, the industrial section, I mean, that was perfect, because I mean, my dad actually worked for a big company and was setting up, believe it or not, radiator plants in Europe, building whole radiators, and he would set up the presses and everything. And I was just imagining the presses coming down and on the steel, you know, and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it also reminds me of Welcome to the Machine on Wish You Were Here.
Okay, yeah,
similar kind of atmosphere, I suppose.
mm-hmm.
But Dean wouldn't have been influenced by that in the slightest, would you?
I do know that one. I have since become slightly influenced by prog. I've actually heard some of this stuff now.
Yeah, you're ruined.
I know.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I have long been fascinated by people who climb mountains, and I can't imagine what it would be like to have a dad who has done that. And did you pick up his you know, his love of doing that, or his habit of doing that?
Well, not really. I mean, I love the outdoors. I've always loved the outdoors. I like going for walks. And when I was a teenager, he did used to take us up to the Lake District in the northern part of England. And we did used to go climbing when we were kids in the sort of 70s and 80s. I can't say I enjoyed it that much, because quite often it was very wet and rainy and cold, and you know, and also we did climb some quite sort of tall mountains that were a bit like that, and we didn't have ropes or anything. I thought that, you know, there was a little bit of health and safety issues here and there, I thought. But we did survive. But yeah, I mean, I do enjoy getting out. I couldn't do it now. When I was a kid, I used to do a bit of abseiling and, you know, going down cliffs and stuff. But I was young and reckless then and didn't think about it. Yeah. I couldn't do it now. I get my knees tremble looking at a tall tower on a telly. Never mind anything.
Yeah, it's not the safest hobby, I would say.
No.
So, according to the information you sent me, that those 5 songs kind of are the album per se, and then these other 2 are labeled as bonus tracks: The Normality of Distance and Another Life Not Lived. Is that correct? Is that how you view it?
Well, yeah, I mean, they are really part of the album, but it was a bit difficult on how we were going to package it, because the idea was to release the album. It's the first album that we've done in a long time, well, ever really, where we kind of wrote it for vinyl. And because we released Seas of Change on vinyl, of course, you've only got 42, 43 minutes. And then, of course, everybody and their what decided, all the big record companies decided they wanted to put all their artists out on vinyl, you know, Adele, Ed Sheeran, whoever, and they sort of picked up on this whole thing. So suddenly there wasn't enough vinyl, enough raw material, and there was a massive delay. So that sort of scuppered our plans to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. But we've been told the vinyls will be ready in February, so that's something. Yeah. And trust us, because again, Galahad, our timing's never been that great. We've always got it a bit wrong. You know, we formed just after the whole sort of second wave of neo-prog, you know, not before it, not in it, but probably 2 or 3 years after. So we were a little bit late. So, but it's been the story of our lives, really. But no, I mean, that was the idea, and then of course, so they would be bonus tracks. And so when the vinyl comes out, it'll kind of all make sense to a certain extent, I suppose. But as many people have pointed out, they're not throwaway tracks. I think they're
not.
And I'm hoping that generally when we release now, we always try and, you know, put tracks on the albums that are, you know, couldn't be construed as just something we bunged on there or whatever, you know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love the idea of you guys being fashionably late for being unfashionable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, prog rock is unfashionable, but within prog rock, we're unfashionable.
It's perfect. It really is. It's perfect.
But we don't mind. Okay.
But you're right. These songs they're not just stuck on, and they it's not like they don't fit in with, you know, the like I mentioned, the consistency of this record. And Normality of Distance, I think, is a song a lot of people can relate to, but was it written specifically about one person? It
was. Yeah. It's about a friend of mine who just went through a very, very difficult stage in her life. It was quite difficult because I kind of knew both the protagonists, and it was a quite difficult thing, but I knew who was right and who was wrong. And as time went on, you kind of gradually got to know what was going on, and it was a bit heart-wrenching at times, to be perfectly honest. But it's kind of all worked out in the end, and you know, and she, you know, she's fine, and he's buggered off with someone else, and he's happy. So, you know,
Time heals all wounds, I guess.
but yeah, and again, you know, being a close friend, it's quite a personal lyric. You know, it's not a made up story about what I think might what happened. It's actually about what did happen.
Yeah.
And it's the same with Another Life Lived as well. It's, you know, that's incredibly sad. But
yeah, it does. Like I said, a lot of people I think can relate to that song, and it's something that I just was interested to know, you know, if that was a generality, or like a composite of many things, or just one story. So that's good to know. And you mentioned Another Life Not Lived, which was co-written by the late Neil Pepper. This is an absolutely emotionally crushing song lyrically. I don't know how you can sing these lyrics and not just crack. Was that an issue for you at all, or are you able to separate yourself from the emotion?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, yeah. I was more concerned about whether how again those that this song is actually relates to, those that it's about, which again is about a friend of mine's son who died at 16 before. That's why it's called Another Life Not Lived, because he didn't even get a chance to really live his life. He took his GCSEs and that was it. Nothing. His exams, you know, and it's so sad. But I was more concerned about how they might feel about me writing about it. But as it happens, you know, it was fine basically. But yeah, and it was kind of me putting myself and imagining how would you feel. I mean, it's an impossible situation. How would you feel if that happened to your child or whatever? Which obviously it does occasionally. And I remember we did a walk for cancer research in my locality to raise money for cancer research, and it was related to this in a way. And it was actually with the parents, or the parents of this young lad. Were involved on this walk, and I did sort of walk with them a bit, and we did talk about it. And it, like you say, it was actually heart-wrenching. In fact, his dad said less than his mum. His mum talked about it almost not matter-of-factly, but you know, more in a, I don't know, straightforward way. But I remember talking to his dad, and he found it very difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I can imagine. Were the lyrics for this done separately from the music? Because I was wondering, Dean, what the process is for you to try to put music with that somber mood together.
So Neil actually wrote the music for that one.
Oh, okay.
So I think he came up with he went through a little phase once he found out his cancer was inoperable. I think he went through a phase he wanted to write a song a day for a week and do 5 to 7 different songs, and that was one of those tracks he did. We put a couple on the Battle Scars album as well, which were and that was literally Lee was Lee on? No, so sorry, Neil was playing bass with us by that point, and he started mucking around with 6-string guitar. And so he got himself a little recording rig, and he decided he was just gonna, and so he played guitar. And when it came to re-recording that song, I think Lee felt the weight of that quite a lot, didn't he, Stuart? I think he was.
Oh yeah.
He was really quite nervous about getting it right, because obviously on the original demo version, it was played by Neil. And I must admit, when I was lucky because I knew exactly what synthesizer Neil had used, so I got exactly the same sounds. I knew exactly where they came from. I was lucky there. And we did try and just keep it as close as possible to the original instrumental that Neil had written.
Yeah, I mean, there is a demo version, a full demo version. In fact, there's one on our website, I think, which has been up there a long time. And I loved the atmosphere on that. And I was just hoping, fingers crossed, that we could still capture that atmosphere on the new song. Obviously, the quality of the recording and everything on the new song would be better, but it was more about the atmosphere as well. And I think we managed it. And I also love the way that it ends, because everything just peels away, and then of course you just got that sort of vocal at the end, and it's quite an unusual way of ending an album, but I think it works.
I just realized I forgot to ask you if you played The Last Great Adventure for your dad, and what did he think of it if you did?
I haven't played it fully to him, actually. I've played him bits of it, and I've shown him the booklet and everything else, and he did show an interest, which was good. The trouble is, his eyes aren't brilliant, and his hearing's not very good at all. Although he's just had his hearing aids redone. So he said that once he's going to come over at some point and have a listen to everything properly. So I'm waiting for that. But no, he was very interested in it, and in fact, he looked at the goggles on the artwork and said, "Oh, they're my goggles." And they are exactly the same as the ones that he used when they were climbing in those days. The old airplane kind of goggle thing. So he even told me what the model number was, but I can't remember.
That's amazing. Wow. I'm going to ask you both this to take turns answering this question, but when someone buys this record and listens to it start to finish, what do you kind of hope that they take away from it? I'll start with you, Stu.
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, I suppose I hope that it connects with them in some way. I think with all music, you want it to connect to the listener, and you want to have some kind of emotional connection there. I'm hoping that the album does. We've actually had some really good positive feedback on this one, and to be honest, I was actually quite surprised, because we weren't quite sure how it would be received. It's very different to the last album. In fact, I think it's quite different to previous albums that we've done, because there's a lot of different kind of influences on there. But it seems to have gone down pretty well, and I think maybe we have struck a nerve. And I think the whole Last Great Adventurer idea seems to have gone down well with people, because we've all got relatives, haven't we? We've all got dads, mums, fathers who've done this, and sometimes I think when people get older, you forget that they've had a life, that they actually probably did some really good and interesting things when they were younger. And you kind of forget that. I think that sort of fades away as time goes by, and of course, if you don't know them, you don't know. But there are so many interesting older people out there, as well as younger people, obviously, and that's kind of what I wanted to get across to a certain extent. And also the last two songs, they are quite personal. In fact, I think the lyrics on this album are probably the most personal that I've written in a long time, other than Enclosure, which I didn't write. But I think it's got, again, it does hopefully have some kind of emotional connection.
Yeah.
So that's what I would.
Dean, you got to cheat. You got to listen to his answer, so I'm going to ask you to the same question. Give me your thoughts.
Well, something which has stuck with me. I joined Galahad, I think it was 1996.
Yeah.
We did Following Ghosts, and the internet was a new thing at the time. And Stu read out or shared with me an email, and someone sent an email from South America, I believe it was Argentina, and he thanked us for the album, and he was going through a rough time in his life, and that album, he said, his words were, it pulled him through. It helped him through a rough time in his life. I don't know what the rough time was, whether it would be, relationship. No doubt it's going to be the death of someone or a relationship, which, heavy things. But that's always stuck with me. I've never forgotten that. And that is the best thing you can hear. If you've written some music or written some songs and you've helped someone get through something like that, that's just amazing. Absolutely amazing. And if that, on any level at all, people can, like Stuart was saying, connect with it, and it means something to them, then that's, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, like you say, if it connects emotionally, and also if it makes people happy, elated in some way, as well as reminding them maybe of good times or whatever. As long as we've got a mainly positive influence on someone listening to it, then that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, there's bound to be people out there who don't, you know, who don't like what we do. We know that, and I think it was Gary Newman actually. Again, a big Dean's a big fan of Gary Newman. I read an interview with him many years ago, and there are so many people out there, musicians, who are worried about doing things, and I think, well, no, just do what you do, just get it out there, because there's always going to be someone who likes what you're doing. But also, in this interview, Gary Newman said, he said, to be honest, it doesn't matter whether you're Pink Floyd or the Beatles or Genesis or whoever. There'll always be more people who don't care about you or don't like you. Do you know what I mean? You're always going to be in a minority compared to the billions of people on this earth. You're only ever going to appeal to a fairly small audience, you know, and that doesn't matter how big a band you are. And when you put it like that, you think, well, yeah, that's right. It is, you know, it's the way it is. But again, like I said, we do write for ourselves, but luckily we pull a few thousand people with us, so it's all worthwhile in the end.
Yeah. All right. The album is called The Last Great Adventurer by Galahad. Is there a place where people can buy this that helps you the most, like maybe through your Bandcamp or something?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a Bandcamp page, an official Bandcamp page, which I can't remember the actual address, but it's easy to find. And of course, we have our own website as well. And generally, we encourage people to buy directly from us because, of course, that way we don't have to pay fees and what have you. But our website address is www.galahadonline.com for anyone who's interested. And again, we're distributed by various, you know, distributors all over the place if people want to buy elsewhere. Stream it on Spotify if you like it, but we'd rather you buy it. It's better than getting 0.0003 per stream.
That's gone up. Ah.
0.002p per stream.
Yeah, I find that the streaming services, and I've switched from Spotify to Tidal, in part because they give a little bit more than Spotify, in part because they have a higher quality stream. But I find that the best use of those streaming services for me personally, because as you can see behind me, I do like I do like the physical product, is try it out.
Yeah.
And you know, you can try it out, and even on a very small level, you're helping the artist. And then if you know, buy what you like, support the artist by buying what you like, and you know, buying their merchandise and going to see a show and that kind of thing. So you know, that's always the word that I try to get out. So I'm glad that this has been, it seems to be well received for you guys from the reviews that I've read. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you.
other than galahadonline.com, where are you guys active at all on social media? Is the Facebook page the best place to interact?
There is a Facebook page and a group and what have you as well. Yeah, people can get a hold of us. But going back to Spotify and all those kind of streaming things, I think we just view it really as you kind of alluded to, it's a way of marketing the band. It's a way of getting out there. Because the problem these days is it's a lot easier these days to get music out there if you're in a band. But there's so much noise, there's so much stuff. It's just finding a way to kind of get through all that to appeal, and it's quite hard. It's not so straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
But yeah, but no, I mean, luckily this does seem to have got through, and some of the bigger magazines and the national magazines over here seem to be taking notice of us. You know, years ago we had to fight tooth and nail to get any space in any blimmin' magazine, you know, unless it was a prog fanzine or something or whatever. And of course, prog magazine is out there as well, which does help a lot of the bands to get published and get out there. But no, it's quite a good time these days. Actually, it's a lot better than it was in the dark days of the 80s. You know.
Is there going to be is there a tour? Is there some festival dates? Are you guys going to play some of this stuff live here soon?
We'd like to play live at some point. Unfortunately, I won't say too much, but Spencer, our drummer, actually had a recurrence of his brain tumor. Oh, no. So he's actually gone through 2 rounds of chemo in the last year and a half, and at the moment he's actually in recovery. So that's one reason why we've been very quiet on the live front, on the gig front. And I know Spence wants to get out there as well. So it's really just a case of when he, you know, hopefully he'll feel better and we'll be able to get out there at some point.
Yeah.
But
Well, we'd love to see it some of these festivals, and it maybe Cruise to the Edge and things like that that cater toward progressive rock fans.
yeah, Chris the Edge is one I've always kept an eye on. Yeah, yeah. But I think I tried to get in touch with someone a few years ago, but I don't think I heard anything back actually. But you never know.
Never know. Well, again, the Last Great Adventurer came out October 24th. Galahad. Guys, thank you so much for telling me about this record and giving me some of the background and insight into the making of it. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the music has just been it's been fantastic getting to know this record, and thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
No, thank you, Michael.
That's
yeah,
lovely.
No,
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for taking the time out to interview us.
Absolutely, for sure.